you know, when I think of cloud today, what's successful is what I don't have to think about, right? I think about Dropbox. I think about putting my photos in the cloud. I think about a folder that's on my desktop and I drop those files in and it's automatically up in the cloud. And then when I connect at home, it's syncing at home, or it's syncing on my phone, or all those things. I mean, is it really that simple? Are we talking about putting a VM in a folder in your private network and it's going to show up in the cloud, or what are we talking about exactly?
Yeah, I'll start from down here if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
So you've been reading my blog, Rich. So if you've ever heard me talk about cloud, and if you come to my session at 3:45 over in one of the little session rooms, I'll put a pitch out there. You should come, all of you. You'll hear me talk about cloud, my definition of cloud, and it's summed up in 3 different words. I don't care. That's my definition of cloud. If anybody asks you what cloud is, say, I don't care. And you'll get that good same reaction, right? That chuckle. But the reason is it's to your point. You didn't have to care about how you configured Dropbox. You just put files there and they're magically everywhere. You didn't have to worry about, where your expenses went in Expensify. You didn't have to worry about all this stuff about when it's backed up or how it's backed up or any of that stuff. Supposedly it's all taken care of, right? As long as you're not using Amazon. No, just kidding. That was a dig. I have to. People that know me know that. But you didn't have to care about that, right? Now, the people in this room are the people that do have to care, right? We have to care about what's in sort of the middle of that picture. So I'll go into details on that in my session. You can come and figure that out. But really, at the end of the day, IT is about connecting users to data. That's our job. Even before IT was here, it was still users, and the data was in a file cabinet down the hall, and you walked to the file cabinet and got it. Then some uber lazy guy like myself invented the mainframe, draped a long cable across the thing, gave you a green screen, and now you could sit in your uber comfy chair, right? And you didn't have to go. You could just get the data. Now I can sit in the bed or on the toilet or wherever I am and still get to the data, right? Because I have my little iPhone or BlackBerry or whatever I happen to be using. But I don't have to care about what device I'm using. I don't have to care about where the data is. All I know is I can get to my data. It's users and their data. And we have to remove all that complexity that's in front of them to be able to do that. And that's what cloud computing eventually is. Anything you're doing in your architecture where you're making it easier for users, where they don't have to care about stuff and it just happens, you're driving towards cloud computing. Anything you put in there where you have to care about it, it only works in this one instance or it only works with these particular devices, that's driving you further away from cloud computing. So remember that definition. Cloud computing, when your CIO starts asking you, you say, I don't care. And that'll be a career limiting move probably.
Good luck with that.
Good luck. I don't care.
So I don't really think it's fair to have to go after Mike after that, but that's the way a lot of our customers see it too. They're tired of worrying about infrastructure. The CIOs are tired of worrying about all these nuts and bolts, and they want to get their people to where they're worrying about delivering services from IT to the end users, to the customers. And that's where they want to start leveraging these cloud services. So that's really cloud. Like you said, I don't care about Dropbox, I just know it works. Users, they don't care. They just don't care about that back-end infrastructure. They want access to their data, and they want to be able to do it really from anywhere. And there's no better example of that than the first time I walked an iPad into a hospital right after they released, and I had 8 doctors and an annoyed CIO sitting there talking with me, because now they're like, think of what I can do with this, think of where we can get this, how we can pull this data up here. You can see those people and see what drives them to want these cloud services, and they just want to get out of this business of worrying about, is my data backed up, where is it stored, performance is bad. Just give it to me wherever I'm at, let me be as most efficient as possible.
I'd like to pick up on that I don't care kind of thing. A couple of years back when I was teaching VMware, when it was, DRS had just been introduced and the VMs were going to be flying all over the place, a student asked me, how do I know where my virtual machine is? And I asked them, well, before we even answer that question, can I ask, why do you need to know that? Why do you need to care or know where the virtual machine actually is? So I get I don't care, but I think I would have the riposte of I do care. I care very passionately about my VM in the cloud. Would I put my VM in the PlayStation cloud? Would I put my VM in the Amazon cloud, given that the outages that we recently experienced? Would I want to put it in the IBM cloud if I was the New Zealand airline? The problem with that I don't care is that it's almost that people are abnegating their responsibilities for the infrastructure. And if you're talking about private cloud, how do I reassure my boss that the due diligence that he recognizes that I do, my internal cloud, are being followed to the same degree as in a public cloud? How do I validate that? How do I reassure him that we won't have a major outage? And then the other thing I think about is, you know, the conventional way of achieving some sort of guarantee would be to wrap an SLA around that particular service. And if it's a $1 billion application, how much money do I have to spend in order to pay for that SLA? And will that SLA cost in itself make it almost worthless, putting that application in the cloud? So I've got this idea about, you know, this thing of a hybrid cloud, public and private, that I think what we might see is something I've called a boutique cloud, that the private cloud is this, if you talk about the storefront, you know, things that you advertise to end users, you know, the people who drive down costs and drive down prices are the Walmarts of the world. But there's this other kind of storefront which is, you know, I don't know, Dior or any of those like kind of high-end designer outlets who offer a very specialized service, and they can charge a premium on that because they guarantee a certain quality of experience from that. So I'm kind of thinking that the kind of clouds that we might have in the future is my internal private cloud is this boutique offering, where I offer very high-level qualities of performance, security, audit trails, something I could never get from a public cloud vendor because, quite honestly, they really don't care about my application. They've got lots of other customers. They're basically about saturating their data centers with as many VMs and as much workload as possible because of the money they've invested into that infrastructure. So I kind of think that the kind of hybrid cloud model is inevitable because customers do care. And like when we joked going to your CEO, just say, I don't care. Honestly, if I said that to a CEO, he would look like I was a crazy fool because it is my job to care. So I can't abnegate that responsibility. I mean, just a quick anecdote about this. In the last 3 or 4 years, I put a lot of my equipment in a hosted environment. And I didn't do the due diligence of actually visiting the sites where my kit was going to go. I just turned up with my equipment, drove it to the site and walked in. And that's when I found out what the environment was actually like. So we're talking about open racks without locks, 10-way gang power supplies, gaffer tape to the edge of the rack. And of course there's a power suppression unit because you need that to meet your legal obligations. I walked through the door and I was absolutely horrified what they called a data center. So now when I look to customers saying we want to put stuff outside of our own data center somewhere else, I say to them, you absolutely must visit their location. Because until you walk through the door and actually see what the infrastructure is like, they could be promising the earth to you, you know. And I put that infrastructure in, I've got to care that it will work, and that the wonderful quality of build that I do is being matched by these external providers. So I'm kind of a bit uncomfortable with I don't care.
Well, I think that to really crystallize this, and Mike D, I think you said it, but I want to really hammer in on this, right? It's a two-sided coin. We want the users not to care.
Right.
Okay?
Exactly.
You know, Mike L's got his iPad up here, and he doesn't really, you know, necessarily care how it works or how it gets to the data or how it syncs with his Mac or whatever. I would just, by the way, say that Apple is one of those boutiques that you were talking about, right? Okay, because they control the end-to-end experience, but that's an aside. And that's fine, saying that you don't want the users to have to care about it. But as IT professionals, each and every one of us, and picking up on Mike Leverick's comment, is we have to care. You know, and I know, Mike D, you said it, you know, yeah, all of you, you're all the ones that have to care. So the question becomes, if we're going to make this real, and not just sit here and talk about, you know, vaporous things called clouds, right? What are the things that you need to do every day that help you care so that your users don't have to, right? So if I could throw that out and just say, you know, what would we say as, you know, experts, right? Industry experts. What would we say are the things that all of these fine folks need to worry about on a day-to-day basis that they need to care about so that they can tell their users, don't worry about it, I got it.
Well, why don't you pick one and I will pick one, and
okay.
Because there's probably about 5 or 6 of those.
Oh, there are, absolutely there are.
Pick one out of the top of your head that you would.
So the first thing I would say is, from all of your perspective, is one of the things you have to worry about capacity planning.
Okay.
You need to know what's running in your data center, how much capacity you have, how quickly that capacity is growing, how long it's going to be before you run out, what you're going to run out of first, what you're going to run out of second, how long will it take you to get more, how quickly can you turn the next one up, how seamlessly is it going to interoperate with what you already have. Need that going? Right. So you need to worry about capacity planning and capacity management.
What I would say you have to worry about is, I've got this quote, history repeats itself. The first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. And the idea behind that quote is, I think when people adopt the cloud, they're going to go through a very similar experience as they did with virtualization. So out of that, politics. The way you handle your virtual switches in your physical network changes when you decide to use cloud, and the same is true of storage. Now, I'll pick networking just as one example to make it real. If you look at something like vCloud Directory, you've got 3 different ways of handling the network. Some of them are unpleasant, some of them are quite bleeding edge, but I think most of my customers, the ones who've adopted it, have gone for a VLAN-backed method of dealing the network. Now, what that means at the physical switch level, your network guys have to create pools of VLAN identities ready to be used, who knows when, by end users who might spin up new virtual machines. The virtual switches themselves automatically create virtual port groups, VLAN port groups, to address those VLANs that have been created. Now, if I went to some network teams and I said to them, oh, you know, in your switch, I was asking for 4 or 5 VLANs. Well, you know this new cloud thing, I actually need about 150. And don't ask me when I'll use them, because I don't really know. Cheers, thanks for that. I don't know of many network teams that would go, oh, fine, yeah, we'll just create this whole big pool of VLANs for you to point to and use at when you feel like it. Because from the network perspective, those guys see the VLAN as being one of the primary security mechanisms they've got in their kit bag, that they control what networks are available to who, when, where, and where they go. The idea of a pool of VLANs that I just consume like Pac-Man, yum, 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 when I feel like, and hand back to the pool, is totally foreign. And you could say that about storage, but I won't say that because otherwise I end up maybe saying something that one of the other guys might say.
I think for me, a lot of things people worry about is performance. I mean, it kind of goes with capacity planning, but you know, this promise of the cloud is efficient use of my resources and getting out of the world of siloed infrastructure. And a lot of the reasons we do siloed infrastructure is if I have a large, very important application, SAP, for example, I may build an infrastructure just for SAP, and I may kind of fence that off for performance, for management, for fault isolation, for whatever reason. But now we start wanting to look and spreading infrastructure across applications, across groups, business units, whatever. Performance comes questionable, and the ability to monitor that performance, to do trending, to look for problems, and when there is an issue, to be able to pinpoint it quickly, because again, if we do shared resources and infrastructure, something out of whack on one side can absolutely affect another. So that's one of the biggest worries that I see when talking to people is how do we know what our performance profiles need to be and how do we maintain and monitor them? But luckily, this is also an area that's rapidly maturing as far as tool sets, product sets, capabilities, and functionality. So it's something that people need to be aware of, need to stay on top of. And really, this isn't new. You've been doing it in different environments forever. But it just kind of comes to light as one of those things when you talk cloud that people get a little bit antsy about.
I'm gonna put a little bit of a different spin on this, as I always do. Anybody in here work in the purchasing department? Nobody, not one person. Who in here knows where their purchasing department is? Okay, quite a few, good. So I would say the one thing you need to worry about in cloud, I'm gonna take this to the public side of the cloud first and then come back to the private internal side. On the public cloud side, you need to know where your purchasing department is. You need to go and have a good relationship with your purchasing department, which I know is not always the case, right? The reason being is all the things they just listed are completely valid reasons. How much control you have over that in a public cloud is all in your purchasing department. It's all in the SLAs you write into your contracts, right? And it's all in the enforcement of those contracts. I did a panel not too long ago, and the question was, this is at a software group, they said, how is cloud changing the purchasing department, right? The purchasing department used to be, you wanted a server, you went to the purchasing department. You have to buy a server. Now you want a server in a cloud space, you just whip out your credit card, go, and 20 seconds later you have a server, right? No purchasing department involved. So the purchasing department's probably gonna be a little bit, how would you say, pissed off at you because it's not exactly easy to account for that from an accounting perspective. But at the same time, this is an opportunity for you to have a good relationship with your purchasing department if you plan on leveraging public cloud. Go and talk to them ahead of time. Let them know about this. Figure out how you can work that to where you still get quick access to that cloud, but also leverage their expertise in contract writing to be able to write you a good contract to protect you and to get money back or financial repercussions in case something goes wrong with that public cloud provider. All the public cloud providers are having to deal with this. I deal with them every single day selling to end customers public cloud services. Now with that said, you take that back to the internal side, they, being the business units, are going to come to IT probably expecting the same type of SLA they've just encountered with their public cloud provider, which means they're going to ask you, hey, what can you promise me from a security perspective? What can you promise me from a capacity planning perspective? What can you promise me, from an uptime perspective, from a data recovery perspective? All these different things that they're contracting with from a public cloud provider, and they're probably doing that around IT a lot of times today, they're going to come to IT when you build up your private cloud and say, what can you offer me for this same contract? And they're going to compare you to that public cloud. So go do your research on those public cloud providers today. Even if you don't plan on using them, call them up and say, hey, what's your SLA? What are you going to offer me? And use some of that intelligence when building your own cloud internally, and that'll give you some of the things that you're going to want to have to worry about. Even if you don't, pay attention to all of our stuff or remember any of our stuff, that's a good place to start, is look at those contracts and figure out what are they offering, because if I don't offer this from an internal IT perspective, they're going to go around me with their line of business credit card, and they're going to get their services elsewhere.
And I've been speaking to quite a large number of different vendors for cloud automation software, Dynamic Ops, SkyTap, and others. That's a consistent narrative that you hear over and over again, that people are voting with their feet. Rather than wait for internal IT to turn around and provision something they can use, if the manager or their line manager has enough personal expense, they'll put that through the company credit card. And that's important because you can have hundreds, thousands of virtual machines in some public cloud environment and have no awareness really of the cost of that to the business.
Or the impact.
Or what's running out there on
So
them,
a lot
data-wise.
of these cloud automation vendors want to be able to, offer you a portal by which these guys can come in and ask for that internally, but not actually block the road to an external provider. Because if it is more efficient and quicker and faster and everything else to go to an external provider, why stop them in the first place? But they mustn't do this off their own back with a kind of, if you've got a credit card free and then we can get a couple of VMs up and running, just don't tell finance. As long as it's enrolled into a recognized business process, I don't see any problem with doing that. But it has to be audible, otherwise you're incurring a cost without any visibility of that actually happening. But what I find interesting about that story of the person who takes the credit card and buys a VM on a public cloud is, how much do we suck at doing the job internally that they would rather go and vote with their feet somewhere else than wait for us to deliver it? We must be delivering something that they don't want, or it doesn't arrive in a timely enough fashion that they're voting with their feet. It's just, if you want to take the storefront analogy, it's like you've walked through the door of a shop, you've looked what was available, and you've turned around and walked and gone to the competitor. Well, that's effectively what's happening when that occurs.
And well, I mean, why wouldn't they? Because the fact of the matter is, and I'm sure all of you are all different, but the fact of the matter is, most organizations that virtualize, they end up doing the same things in their virtualized data center that they did in their non-virtualized data center. Okay, so yeah, they're 85% virtualized or 90% virtualized, but they still have somebody that's creating VMs. How is that any different than sticking a server in the rack and loading Windows on? It's not, it's just faster. They haven't retooled their processes. They haven't changed their operations. They haven't worked on the people's culture, changing the culture of the IT department. They've just continued doing the same thing they've always done, just faster. Well, and I think it was Albert Einstein that said, we can't use the same thinking to solve problems that we used when we created the problems. And I'm paraphrasing there. I apologize. Forgive me, Einstein. But the thing is, we have to think differently. I'm not thinking Apple here. So just for the record. But we have to approach this differently than we did before. We have to say, I can now automate this in a much greater fashion than I did before. I can now streamline this process. I can provide orchestration. I can provide automation. I can provide self-service. I can do all the things that would make me look more like one of these external providers and then I wouldn't suck so bad.
Sure. And I think in a way, I don't know what it's like here in the US because I obviously don't live here, but in Europe we're still trapped into this process of yearly budgets, annual budget rounds, and that game there, people, they want, I don't know, 3 million in the budget, but they ask for 5 million because they know they're going to be told that they can't have that. And this kind of fake horse trading that takes place about how much money we get in exchange for a particular budget. And one of the analogies that the cloud providers said to me a while back really rang true. It's like the model that we have right now is like a command and control economy. It's like former Soviet Union, yeah, where somebody determines a 5-year plan. This is what we're going to produce, and this is the target to reach there. And that leads to a lack of choice, a lack of flexibility, and huge inefficiencies. But in a way, in the UK especially, and most of Europe, I would say, that yearly round of budgets and the way of actually financing IT delivers an inflexible model. It's not based on consumer demand.
Right.
It's like saying you can come in my store, but like there's only 3 products, and if you don't like them, then we don't care. It's not offering choice to the consumer, but it's a completely different mindset from customer, business units come to us and we decide, well, we're not going to offer that. We're not going to support the iPad. Sorry, that's not part of our corporate standard. To another way of thinking, which is, here's an array of different devices that we offer you. Pick the one you like. That's a completely different way of thinking, and I often think that the finance models, the way we actually finance IT developments, will have to change from this kind of command control, like Soviet approach to infrastructure services, to something that's much more based around our actual economies, which is capitalistic, it's market driven, it's market led, it's competitive from a price perspective. There are lots of choices of different bundles that you can have, and that's a very, very different culture that most of us actually, I mean, I include myself in this, I didn't grow up in that model.
Most IT departments don't view their end users as customers.
No.
No, they're the end losers.
Well, I've been trying in my own articles, rather than ever saying end users in the articles I write, I'm now trying to write end consumers.
Yeah, we
Every
refer to
time
them as
I
cloud
don't say end
consumers,
user, I
yeah.
say end consumer.
Yeah.
And then just even changing the language by which we talk about other people is a starting point in changing the way we think about what we're offering people.
Yeah, you just hit upon my second rule on building cloud, the 3-step process, right? It's not AA. We only have 3 steps with cloud. So the second step in here is basically go talk to the end user, right? Talk to the user first. Figure out what they want from a cloud perspective and build that. We in IT have had a long history of building, sort of the field of dreams. Build it and they will come, right? So we build something, it's great. We have all this, backup and recovery and everything in there. And then the end user comes in and said, I want a green button that clicks on my email and refreshes my email. That's it. Just green button on a web page. That's it. I don't care if it's ever up, by the way, either, or if it's ever backed up, or if my data disappears. Okay, that's easy to build, right? We can build that in about 5 minutes. Never mind that we built this huge data center that does all this other whiz-bang stuff. So go talk to the end user first to figure out what they want. And that's why they're voting with their feet, right? Like you said, they walked in IT and they said, I don't need all this stuff. That's going to cost me too much and be too long. I'm going to go over here and just get my little application up. Now, maybe behind the scenes, they will come back and they'll say, oh, my hard drive crashed. All my stuff is gone. You were backing that up, right? So maybe behind the scenes, we need to offer them something that they don't really know that they want just yet, sort of force them into it. But at the same time, go talk to the end user when building your cloud and then add on to it from there incrementally.
I think you've hit on a very good point here. You mentioned backup and DR. So if you log into most of these cloud portals, I give you a challenge. Find the button that says backup my VM in any cloud automation layer. It isn't there. And also at the same time, look for the button that says test that my VMs, if they're being replicated somewhere else, that they do actually come up. Now, it's interesting. I was speaking to the VMware cloud practice in the UK, and I was interested that they weren't really pushing or gunning for tier 1 applications in the cloud yet. And the reason is the lack of that kind of support. So I think there's going to be a lot of maturity that'll have to come down in the next 10 years before we even remotely start thinking of tier 1 applications in the cloud. Because how can you go to your management and say, look, I want to put this application in the cloud. Oh, by the way, we have no backup strategy for it, no DR strategy. How many CEOs are going to go, sure, Mike, you go ahead and do that? The answer is none. And that's why I was saying that phrase about history repeats itself. That's exactly what happened in virtualization. So people went for the low-hanging fruit because they were seen as low risk. And because the technologies that we now enjoy, like a very healthy backup environment around virtualization, is now mature, now people are saying, oh, tier 1 applications, yes, in virtualization, don't think about it. But we're now adding another layer on top of virtualization, but the ecosphere around it is in the same way as behind as it was in 2003 or 2004. And I think that's what drove quite low adoption of virtualization in the early years, because people felt that the kind of services that we wrap around that they take for granted weren't there yet. One last thing I will say on this is that I've got this great definition of infrastructure I've been using this year. Infrastructure is anything that you use, but you only notice it isn't there when it doesn't work. Right. And what we're not very good at is making the business aware of the added value that we add to those services. So we add a DR plan, we add backup. We've allowed the businesses to take those infrastructure services for granted. They're not free, they require expertise, and they require testing. And we have to somehow, if we're going to move away from this command control communist way, we have to show them that when we sell that service and it's internally hosted, these are the added bits you get. Just like when you get a product and it says, includes all new feature X, all new feature Y. What I've been calling it is a batteries included approach to cloud. Now, what I get from the public cloud vendors is batteries not included. They just give me a VM, right, but they don't give me anything in the way of backup or DR or
even instructions.
Or there's no instruction manual.
How many people
what I offer when I offer it in my boutique cloud is I offer all these other services that they don't offer. So I'm offering that added value. And we are not very good at doing that. We talk about cost more than we talk about the added value that we wrap around the services that we host internally. And that's how I think people are worried that internal IT is going to be eaten by the public cloud. But that won't happen as long as we're able to demonstrate to the business the extra bits that we add into the pot that they take for granted.
And I mean, you take a look at what the outage with Amazon, they're kind of answering the hard questions for a lot of other cloud providers, both today and tomorrow, the new cloud providers. And so you talk about DR, and a lot of people, when we start this cloud discussion, we start talking about cloud DR, they look at us funny. Well, we're moving this to the cloud, that is DR. No, it's not. And you talk about, what are the solutions there, or what are the things you need to worry about? And I think it opened a lot of people's eyes that is not like this silver bullet to reliability and performance. We still have to think about all these things. How do we recover? What happens when the cloud provider has an issue, and now it's back again to us to recover infrastructure and continue the business? So you're exactly right. There's a lot of things there that aren't there and aren't really being talked about or thought about in many cases.
Sure. I mean, you could even extend that concern about DR to the actual cloud automation level. Mm-hmm. So if you take vCloud for Director, for example, from VMware, it can be clustered. The database backend, which is based on Oracle, can be clustered too. And I guess that cluster could be stretched, to take a point of a recent presentation. But does that amount to a DR plan? It's really an availability solution for that service as opposed to a DR plan for it. And I'm not having a pop at VMware about saying this. You could layer that at any cloud automation software. The actual, how do we protect the layer that the end user comes into? Because if they can't log into the portal and get to their VMs, they're in trouble. So we have to, it's not just the VM, the thing that they're providing, but the infrastructure that allows them to get to that layer in the first place.
Yeah. We got a couple questions out here, Rich, if you want to take those.
Absolutely. We've got about 15 minutes left, so let's get everybody asking questions for the last 15 minutes, but go ahead.
One thing you mentioned about the low-hanging fruit. I completely agree with that with the virtualization. When virtualization first came out, you go after the test environments first, prove its work before you go after micro-prod stuff, right? Now with cloud, you're talking about going strategic first, right? Before you spend $1 bajillion on the cloud infrastructure, private cloud, how do you do
Yeah, so I said it was a strategic initiative, meaning that it's, CIO something driven. It's not, virtualization kind of came in like the PC came in almost. It was, sort of the end consumers or people that just needed to get their job done on a daily basis type of thing. With cloud, we do see it going after low-hanging fruit, like Mike said, because there is no little backup button or DR button in the cloud. At least we haven't found many today. Although wait 4 months, Mike, we'll have something for you. Outside of that, what we see from a costing perspective is you can still go after what I call strategic line of business applications. Scott mentioned down here at the end, it's going to require a different way of thinking. If we do stuff like we have been, the same processes, the same people, the same structure in IT, cloud's not really going to be all that efficient. You're not going to get a really big return from an agility perspective on cloud. Where I have seen it very effective is I sit down with the CTOs and the CIOs on a daily basis and I say, if you have a friend in IT, someone that you trust, absolutely. You have somebody with some line of business that you trust, absolutely. Go take them and their little line of business unit and restructure their whole business unit. The people, your processes, put in cloud and go after every single application in that stack. Whether it's tier 1 all the way down, restructure that over the next few months, right? And change that around to get very agile with cloud, using both internal cloud and using public cloud. This may also involve restructuring some of your applications, because frankly, applications today are written like crap. Sorry for all the software developers in the house. But they're written like crap. And that's one of the problems with Amazon, right? People had built themselves into multiple availability zones. Their applications didn't behave properly to fail over between those different availability zones or stretch across there. Technology is there now to enable you to do that from a writing your application perspective, and you can rewrite your applications. Whether it be using .NET with Azure or Spring with us or anything else, the technology's there. So take that line of business and make it a strategic initiative and go after that whole line of business. And then after that's done, right, that small line of business app, go and then roll it out through the rest of your organization, right? So that's how you make it strategic. Go after the low-hanging fruit is that person you trust, the person you know that can go knock heads and get stuff done and change people around and change the processes around. That's the people I've seen most successful. Now you can go and do it sort of whole hog or go after just the low-hanging fruit, but it's a much slower return, and you're going to be sitting here at the end of the year going, wow, this cloud thing really hasn't turned out to be so great for us. You're going to be frustrated with it, and I've seen that over and over again. It goes back, I have a blog post going out, I think tomorrow, what I call my 2 pizza box rule. You can take the team that's building or operating or sort of using the cloud and you can feed them with 2 pizzas, then you're good. You're going to have success with the cloud. If it's more than that and you go into a bigger team and you involve more people, you're going to be completely screwed. You're going to be here for the next 3 years with cloud, right? Trying to figure it out.
2 pizza rule.
So
That's good.
2 pizza box rule.
Remember that.
I mean, I mentioned low-hanging fruit. I think it's fair to say that the reason people say that is because I think they're trying to find the least line of resistance in order to get the thing running. So if you take a legacy application or if you take a test and dev environment, because these environments represent things that have a kind of low risk attached to them, the people who are risk averse to new technologies will put up roadblocks against you doing it. I mean, that's exactly like virtualization. SQL admins didn't want a virtual machine, they wanted a physical box, that kind of stuff. And the annoying thing about that is the reason that people are going for the low-hanging fruit isn't because the technology may not be there yet, it's the politics that they're trying to avoid. So they're trying to get round that particular person to get their project further on. And then the hope is once we've done the low-hanging fruit and we've proved and demonstrated that it does work, what we're going to do is come back and be at those people like, why aren't you virtualized? Why aren't you in the cloud? But it's a bit of it's a tricky question to ask because you take the applications that have the least value to you and then put them in the most expensive or very expensive environment. And that's no different from what virtualization was. I mean, customers used to say, this VMware thing, this ESX and Virtual Center, this is really, really expensive. But all we're going to put into it initially is our test and dev and our legacy systems. And I said, well, why are you being so risk averse? Why don't you trust the technology? The real benefits will be for tier 1 applications. But nobody had the balls, for want of a better phrase, to actually take that risk and put their neck on the line. And that's the server admin who overspecs something to cover their CYA, all the way up to senior management who won't do it because they want to CYA themselves as well. They don't want to be the first person to put a tier 1 application in cloud, have it go belly up, and be the person who is being finger pointed. Whose idea was it to put this application in the cloud? So it comes from a risk averseness, as well as it's not there for backup, it's not there for DR yet. There's a kind of, and I think that risk averseness, if I want to be honest about it, it's more in Europe than it is in the US. Because I think in the US here, you seem to be much more willing to take on new technologies and to push them to see what they can be done. In Europe, you find a lot of people, that the arms go up, the arms get, well, I'm not too sure, we've never done it this way, the blinkers come on. So if anything, I think in the US, we might see more people going to the cloud early because you were early adopters of other technologies as well. You seem to be less turned off by the risk and more turned on by the benefits that you might get from that risk. So it's all about risk and return, balancing the two. Are you prepared to take the risk for a return that's valuable? So go for tier 1 applications, but, are you prepared to take the risk? It might blow up in your face is the question that people will say to you.
Well, and I'll add my 2 cents. I think you're going for the low-hanging fruit that matters. You're going for the low-hanging fruit that you want to be in the cloud if you want to move it, and it needs to be there and it needs to be available, right? Maybe you're still, one thing that I got out of this whole conversation is that cloud's been going on for a long time now, right? We just called it different things. We called it managed services. We called it hosted services. Whether we're running a VM in the cloud or on the internet, whether you were running it internally, you virtualized your P4 applications, it's in your cloud, if you will, right? We can all make those arguments. So, am I replicating that VM to managed services provider or a hosted services provider who happens to have a cloud architecture that's in Mike's data center that you described, that may be running on Mike's hardware, and the point is that it's shared infrastructure, it's infrastructure as a service, it's and then Mike describes software as a service or a service in general that you don't know how it was put together, or maybe your team put it together, but your users don't know how to put it together. But there's different reasons and different ways to put things in the cloud, right? And I'd be remiss if I didn't say something about backup, but if I'm paying money and I'm going to write an SLA and cloud providers are figuring out ways to back up the VMs, right? And shame on you if you don't get that written into your SLA. But it's all being developed, as we go, if you will. But there's a solid solution already there, right? So
let's take another question. Now this guy over here had a question real quick. So let me repeat the question back because I'm not sure if everybody heard it. I want to make sure I heard it. You're interested in kind of seeing what is the status of the internal cloud? Where does it stand today? And are we just rehashing the architectures of the past? Is that the greatest goals? Growth. Okay, thank you. Greatest growth for the internal cloud. So I would answer that question with certainly there is some measure of duplication with what we've done before. I wouldn't say that cloud computing is simply another name for what we've done before, because what we're asking you to do now is to do the hard things, and that is change the culture, change the thinking, change the process. Before, if you talk about hosted services or managed services, it was simply farm the work to somebody else. It wasn't about changing the way we did things. It was something about paying somebody else to do it. All right? And what we need to do is we need to change the way that we approach how we're providing services. We need to be thinking like every single one of our end users is a consumer and has the option to shop somewhere else if they so desire. And we need to make sure that our offerings are price competitive, performance competitive, and feature competitive. And we need to build every single one of our offerings with that in mind.
Sure.
And being able to reflect the cost back. I mean, I think one thing that we haven't mentioned, and then I'll shut up, I promise, is reflecting that cost back to the consumer. If we don't have some way of showing the cost of what they're consuming back to them, even if your internal financial models don't allow you to do chargeback, to at least be able to do a show back and say, this is what you're consuming in our internal cloud, right, in our private cloud, then everybody's going to take everything they can get. You offer them a menu, an a la carte menu, small, medium, large. I'll take a large. Thank you. Supersize that VM for me. Because what does it matter to them? They don't care. There's no cost associated with that. There's no internal financial accountability.
Yeah, and
right?
that's about people taking the infrastructure services we provide for granted. If you're looking for the biggest enemy in the internal cloud or the private cloud, I think is silos and the silo mentality.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the things I've been trying to do in the last couple of months or so is try to get to the heart of why people do silo. Now, sometimes people silo because of performance issues. Sometimes they silo because if they keep the various applications in separate silos, they can't affect another silo and break it down. But in some cases, the only reason they're siloing is because of the licensing arrangements that surround the product. I mean, the elephant in the room is Oracle. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if I want to get rid of silos and present a large number of ESX hosts, 32 in a cluster or more, yeah, I would then have to license Oracle on that for every single socket in that environment. So I'm kind of forced to silo certain applications merely because of the license craziness from another vendor who we have little or no control over. So I think there's some, often we talk about what you have to do in your organizations to make this cloud thing happen. Well, the boot is on the other foot, isn't it? What are the vendors going to do to make this cloud thing actually easier? And if we still in 10 years' time talking about products that are licensed for every socket in the box, even though the VM only has 2 vCPUs, we won't have got very far down this cloud view because customers will still be siloing because the cost of licensing alone would make it impossible to break out of this kind of silo model that we've got. So I think the silo is the silo thinking. Some of it is legit, and some of it is actually being caused by things that are outside of the control of customers, like the licensing example I was giving. But the biggest stymieing point, I think, for adoption of the private cloud is this silo approach. And I must admit, I'm kind of infected with that as well in my brain. I think of silos, and I think, I can't think that way anymore. I've got to think it in a different way. But our customers are still in that loop as well. We're all trying to get out of a certain mindset.
So any final question, final words? These guys have sessions to go to, so last chance. Anybody? Any final words, guys?
I do care.
I don't care.
Thank you for coming.
I'll be around after the session if everyone wants to come up and chat. So it's fine.
I have a session at 3:45 if you want to hear me.
I'm doing an SRM futures session right now.